Right now on Morning News Now, motivation and momentum. A surprise appearance by former President Donald Trump on day one of the Republican National Convention, just 2 days after he was shot in an assassination attempt at a campaign rally. Now, the official GOP nominee for president has also announced his running mate, plus a major legal victory for Mr. Trump as a federal judge dismisses his classified documents case. We are in Milwaukee as day 2 of the RNC gets underway. Also this morning, President Biden all in and not backing down in his bid for re-election, telling our own Lester Holt he's got what it takes to beat Donald Trump in November.
Who do you listen to on deeply personal issues like the decisions whether to stay in the race or not?
Me. My mental acuity has been pretty damn good. I've gotten more done than any president has in a long, long time, in 3.5 years.
His message to voters, including what he'd had to say about last month's disastrous debate performance. And the Midwest slammed by a severe summer storm that brought heavy rain, wind, even tornadoes overnight. It's not over yet. We are tracking the conditions, the dangers, and what to expect where you live. Plus, modernizing Medicare. A new plan could soon expand Medicare coverage to include digital services. We'll tell you more on the proposal and what it could mean for you at home.
Good morning. Good to have you with us on this Tuesday. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We are going to get started this morning in Milwaukee with day 2 of the Republican National Convention.
The convention began yesterday as scheduled, less than 48 hours after the assassination attempt against former President Trump. He made an unscheduled appearance on the convention floor last night to the roars of an approving crowd. He did not speak, but you could see his injured right ear covered by a bandage. We're also learning more details this morning about Saturday's shooting in Pennsylvania. A federal law enforcement official tells NBC News local police officers notified the former president's Secret Service detail they were looking for a suspicious person in the area before the shooting.
Earlier in the day, Mr. Trump named Ohio Senator Vance to be his running mate. Vance was once a vocal critic of the former president, but has since become a close and outspoken ally. Mr. Trump officially became the Republican nominee during the roll call of the states when Florida's delegates put him over the top.
On behalf of our entire family and on behalf of the 125 delegates in the unbelievable state of Florida, we hereby nominate every single one of them for the greatest president that's ever lived, and that's Donald J. Trump, hereby declaring him the Republican nominee for President of the United States of America.
We have full coverage ahead this morning, including the latest on the investigation into the assassination attempt of the former president. But let's begin this morning with NBC's Garrett Haake, who joins us from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Garrett, good morning. So now we officially have a Republican ticket for the general election. We'll see if there's real signs and not those handmade ones we saw yesterday. But walk us through this eventful first day of the convention and how Senator Vance, a one-time Trump critic, came to be his running mate.
Hey, Joe. Good morning. Look, Senator Vance was kind of always the front runner for this job. He has grown so close to Donald Trump and especially to Donald Trump's eldest son. He's really kind of a pure MAGA conservative in the Senate now. But the effort was such to keep this secret that even Vance only found out he was the pick about 20 minutes before Donald Trump announced it. That led to the scene you're describing where attendees here were having to write his name in on Trump signs, the campaign not even printing out the merch to have them ready for the announcement yesterday. This process that ended with J.D. Vance becoming the nominee really did start several years ago when Vance, who was at the kind of beginning of his political career, a very vocal Trump critic, coming around on Trump, turning into a Trump acolyte, one of his loudest voices sort of for the MAGA wing of the party in the Senate. This long process by which Vance has said he was convinced by Donald Trump's record to get on his side. It'll be that record that he's going to be asked to go out and defend across the country now, but especially across those Rust Belt states where the Ohio senator is expected to be a major player for the Trump campaign going forward.
Garrett, we saw the former president last night, as we said, sort of a surprise, the first time we've seen him since that assassination attempt, but we do expect to hear from him when he accepts his party's nomination in a speech as the convention concludes on Thursday. And we understand this is not going to be the speech that he had initially planned. Following what happened on Saturday, he's changed it. What can you tell us about what we can expect?
Yeah, that's right. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see Donald Trump again these next couple of days. In 2016, remember, he was a presence in some capacity at every night of his convention, but appearing last night to the roars from the crowd, the first time we were seeing his bandaged ear after that assassination attempt on Saturday. The former president has told reporters that he's spoken to that the assassination attempt really did change his thinking on this moment in our politics, and his speech on Thursday night in particular. He said he threw out a tougher draft of it, and he's starting over, trying to reach some kind of national unity. His son Eric was on our air last night and explained what he knows about what his father will say on Thursday. Listen to this.
His speech is beautiful. It's inspirational. It's forward-looking for this country. It's incredibly positive. It's exactly what we need right now. That's exactly what this country needs. It's the right tone. And frankly, I think it's a lot of what you're seeing out here. I mean, people are dancing. They're holding the American flag. The patriotism in this room is unbelievable. I mean, these people in here, they love America. They bleed red, white, and blue. And we need a lot more of that in this country.
Now, in his 10 years or so on the public stage as a political figure, we've not typically seen that kind of more optimistic, forward-looking rhetoric from Donald Trump. So it'll be a very interesting moment to watch on Thursday night, what that means to him and whether he can translate that vision to the country going forward.
Garrett, real quickly, what can we expect on day 2? What's the theme?
The theme tonight is make America safe again, make America strong again. Expect to hear about immigration and crime. The one speech I'm really looking at, Joe, Nikki Haley, Donald Trump's only meaningful primary opponent, is expected to speak tonight. Will she do a Ted Cruz-style heel turn like we saw in 2016, or will she give a more full-throated endorsement of the man who defeated her in the primary? You have to tune in.
All right, Garrett Hake in Milwaukee. Garrett, thank you. And we'll have much more from the Republican National Convention throughout the day here on NBC News Now. Our extensive live coverage of Day 2 gets underway at 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll also have primetime coverage tonight on NBC.
Let's now take a look at the investigation into the assassination attempt on former President Trump. We have NBC News law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter with us this morning. Tom, thank you for being here. So let's start with this. The look into the motive. We understand the FBI has been investigating the shooter's phone, which often can provide clues, right? What do we know so far? How is that going as we do this deep dive on him?
I mean, think about it, Savannah. Your phone is your life, and the phone doesn't lie forensically. So you either search for something or you didn't. You either have an app or you don't. You messaged or you didn't. And so I think what the FBI was hoping for was that by getting into the phone and doing an analysis of the contents of that phone, that they would be able to glean some clues, not just on the how. They're definitely getting that, you know, what receipts he had in his pocket, when the ammo was purchased, all those type of details are starting to come into focus, but the why. And according to our reporting, at least from 2 senior U.S. law enforcement officials, a preliminary review of that phone has not helped them get any closer to a potential motive. That's going to make it tricky going forward.
The other aspect to all this is how law enforcement responded. We're learning more. We understand people headed to the event noticed the gunman behaving strangely. Police tried to approach him before he opened fire. Police also warned the Secret Service they were looking for a suspicious person at the rally. What else can you tell us about what we're learning about the moments leading up to the shoot?
So apparently, Joe, this all goes down to the magnetometer. And so where people are trying to get into the event, they notice this person, they notice them acting a little bit strangely, they tell local police. Local police radios it in. They even take a picture, according to our station in Pittsburgh. They take a photograph of this person, they get it to the command post, and then they try to find the person because they lose them at some point. To be clear, the idea of a suspicious person at any political rally, that happens actually fairly often. But what did they notice on this specific person? What was done to find them? And then once you hear, well, we're looking for a suspicious person, and then you see somebody that we're looking at on the video right there that's on top of the roof, what action was taken there? All sorts of questions. It's radio traffic, some of which is encrypted. It's the Secret Service's radio traffic. Some of it is local radio traffic. All those type of things need to be poured over in the coming couple of days.
So we understand now that the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees the Secret Service, is conducting a review. Tell us where we're at about the investigation into how this was responded to and how it happened in the first place.
Right. So the Secret Service and the DHS Secretary Mayorkas have promised that there will be an independent review into it. I mean, look, when you think about the season, the political season that we're going into, it's really just kicking off. This is not exactly like it's the last week of the campaign. And these candidates love to do these rallies. Certainly Trump loves to do these type of outdoor rallies. We've seen him do it the entire time he's ever campaigned. So there are some serious questions that need to be answered now. There's always been, or at least since 2016, serious questions about resources for the Secret Service. Do they have enough agents? Do they have the resources to go out there and do it? And then what is going to be the interaction with local law enforcement from here on out? A lot of these states, this is Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania State Police is not at all unused to candidate events, so this is not a new thing for them to deal with. And they're a competent law enforcement agency, but what was done at even the more hyper-local level with the local police department, again, all questions that need answers. Secret Service, big organization, they're charged with protecting our top political leaders. So, yeah, I think that's why we're going to get a serious, or hopefully a serious investigation to determine what happened.
Tom Winter, a lot to come here. I'm sure we'll be talking more. Thanks for your reporting.
Got it. Another major headline. One of the criminal cases against former President Trump was dismissed yesterday by a federal judge. That stunning decision in the classified documents case out of Florida is the latest major legal victory for Trump. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett has more on the decision and reaction.
It was already indefinitely on hold. A federal judge in Florida handing Donald Trump a sweeping, unexpected legal windfall, dismissing the charges he'd faced for hoarding classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago estate after leaving the White House and then allegedly obstructing the government's efforts to get them back.
Violations of those laws put our country at risk.
Judge Eileen Cannon finding the appointment of that top prosecutor, Special Counsel Jack Smith, improper. Cannon, a Trump appointee, concluding in a 93-page decision that Smith's appointment by Attorney General Merrick Garland violated the Constitution, as Smith wasn't nominated by the president or confirmed by the Senate. That reasoning, a dramatic departure from every other court that's looked at the issue. The former president pleaded not guilty to the charges last summer. Mr. Trump described as very happy with the court victory, according to a source who spoke with him, as he called for the dismissal of his 3 other pending cases. Lester asking President Biden to weigh in on the ruling.
Judge Cannon dismissed the documents case, as you may have heard, in Mar-a-Lago. Can I first get your reaction to that?
I'm not surprised.
Our thanks to Laura Jarrett for that report. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos joins us now for more on this. So the Justice Department, the special counsel, they do plan to appeal this. We know this is not going to go to trial before the election, but what is this appeals process going to look like potentially?
Yeah, unlike President Biden, I was surprised. If anyone thought this case was going to be dismissed, they probably expected it would be related to the immunity decision by the Supreme Court not too long ago. But this was certainly a surprise, and the timing was really interesting. Doesn't look good for Judge Cannon because 90-plus pages means that this wasn't just hammered out over the weekend. This was at least in some kind of draft form for some time. So one has to wonder about the timing of the release of this opinion. Now, timing going forward, that's always the second or third question, and the answer is always it depends. It depends on the appeals court. It depends how much of a priority they place on this. And then, of course, the next question after that is if the appeals court doesn't overturn it, does it end up at the Supreme Court? Does it end up at the Supreme Court no matter what? And is Justice Thomas's signal that he sent in his concurring opinion anything we should read into?
Let's explain that. When the presidential immunity decision was made, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote a concurring opinion that addressed this very specific issue, which some found odd, but that's raised questions about whether the Supreme Court might want to take this up, right?
Odd because it was gratuitous. It wasn't really necessary. And also, Justice Thomas was alone in that concurring opinion. And it really raised this issue of the appointments clause, which Judge Cannon quoted liberally. She also quoted not then Justice Amy Coney Barrett, but some of her academic writings as well, in a way that almost I would as an advocate. I try to do this all the time. If I'm writing a motion before a judge, I look for anything that the judge has said, basically to kiss up to the judge and say, look what you wrote, Judge. Aren't you so smart? Please rule in my favor. And it really struck me that that, in a way, was what Judge Cannon was trying to do. I said justice. Maybe I'm slipping. Maybe I'm previewing something if Donald Trump's ever elected. This is something that I think is really, really interesting, the way she writes, as if she's insulating, planning for the future, knowing that this will be appealed and bolstering her argument in 90-plus pages. She's there's an uphill battle here because for decades now, since the 70s, the country has interpreted the Supreme Court decision in Nixon to say that you can appoint under these regulations a special counsel like Smith.
Let's talk more about like the specificity of exactly what she said. Specifically, one thing, Judge Aileen Cannon ruled that special counsel Jack Smith's funding was also unconstitutional. Explain that to us. Explain more about this appointments clause.
So that's the appointments clause is the idea that Jack Smith was not properly appointed because he's an officer that needs to be confirmed by the Senate. The appropriations clause argument is a different argument, one that the court didn't reach. And that's really probably a strategic decision by not reaching it here. But it's a strange thing to signal. This is how I would rule, but it's not the grounds for dismissal. She's saying, essentially, if it comes back, I get another swing at this, and then I would dismiss it on appropriations clause. And then, of course, we have no idea if the immunity decision would affect yet a third opportunity to dismiss this case. Judge Cannon has sent a signal, in my view, and that signal is that this case, one way or another, is not going forward.
Real quick, you mentioned this already, but it seems as if this decision goes against the precedent we've seen for decades when it comes to these issues with special prosecutors, right?
Yes, since the Nixon era, 1974. And look, the special counsel and the independent counsel statute before that and amidst that has had a checkered history. But this argument's been around for some time. It's really interesting because the language in the statute speaks of being able to appoint a retained special counsel. And I'm really paraphrasing here, and the words are important. But the way Judge Cannon interpreted that was that it would be an already appointed special counsel. The statute doesn't give the Attorney General the power to appoint a new special counsel. Really interesting interpretation of the language.
All right, Danny Savalos, thank you so much.
As always. Well, President Biden sat down with nightly news anchor Lester Holt for his first interview since Saturday's assassination attempt on former President Trump. In this NBC News exclusive, Biden discusses how to move forward in the wake of this weekend's violence and also address those concerns about his age. Take a look.
Mr. President, thank you for sitting down with us. There's a lot to talk about. I'd like to start with the horrible events of last weekend. It has shocked a lot of Americans. A political rally, your opponent, Donald Trump, shot in the middle of greeting his supporters. You spoke to Mr. Trump afterward. Can you give me a sense of that conversation?
Very cordial. I told him how concerned I was and wanted to make sure I knew how he was actually doing. He sounded good. He said he was fine. And he thanked me for calling him. I told him he was literally in the prayers of Jill and me. And I hope his whole family was weathering this.
Well, let's talk about the conversation this has started. And it's really about language, what we say out loud and the consequences of those. You called your opponent an existential threat. On a call a week ago, you said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate that.
I didn't say crosshairs. I was talking about focus on. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was, there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term is bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate. Focus. I mean, there's a whole range of things that, look, I'm not the guy that said, I want to be a dictator on day one. I'm not the guy that refused to accept the outcome of the election. I'm not the guy who said that wouldn't accept the outcome of this election automatically. You can't only love your country when you win.
Mr. President, you've been in politics a very long time, so let's speak frankly. We're all adults here. Has this shooting changed the trajectory of this race?
I don't know, and you don't know either.
I don't know, but something you've given thought to?
No, I've thought less about the trajectory of the case than two things. One, what his health is, that was secure, number one. And number two, what happens from here on in terms of the kind of coverage that the president and vice president and former president and new vice president get in terms of, look, I've never seen a circumstance where you ride through certain rural areas of the country and people have signs there, big Trump signs with middle signs saying F Biden, and a little kid standing there putting up his middle finger. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that is just inflammatory, and kind of viciousness. It's a very different thing to say, look, I really disagree with Trump's the way he takes care of taxes, the way he wants a $5 trillion tax cut for people who are making a lot of money next time around. Doesn't focus on working class people.
And I asked him about his struggle in the debate and the calls from some Democrats for him to step aside. Do you feel like you've weathered the storm on this issue of whether you should be on the ticket or not?
Look, 14 million people voted for me to be the nominee in the Democratic Party, okay? I listened to them.
In your last TV interview, you were asked if you had watched the debate, and your answer was, I don't think so, no. Have you since seen it?
I've seen pieces of it. I've not watched the whole debate.
The president also responding to news of Donald Trump's new vice presidential pick. I want to ask you about, just shortly before you and I sat down, former President Trump named his vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance. What does that tell you, his qualities, what does that tell you about former President Trump's values in terms of who he will surround himself with in a next administration should he win?
Well, it's not unusual. He's going to surround himself with people who agree completely with him. Have a voting record, like support him. Even though if you go back and listen to the things that J.D. Vance said about Trump.
Our thanks to Lester Holt for bringing us that interview with the president. Well, for more on this, let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Monica, good morning. So we just heard some of the president's conversation there, of course. What made him decide specifically to keep that interview as planned, given everything that has unfolded since Saturday and given that his other plans had changed, had been canceled? And then tell us anything else about his message.
Yeah, because this interview had been announced last week, long before that assassination attempt on former President Trump's life. But President Biden, with his team, they huddled, they discussed it, and they said, we want to keep this interview because we want to echo the message that the president aimed to deliver in his Oval Office address the night before, which was one of national unity and trying to really call on Americans to reduce the heat on an already heightened political environment. Here's a little bit more about that in an exchange with Lester Holt.
What can you and what will you do, at least things you can control, to lower down the temperature, the rhetoric out there?
Continue to talk about the things that matter to the American public. It matters whether or not you accept the outcome of elections. It matters whether or not you, for example, talk about how you're going to deal with the border instead of talking about people as being vermin. And I mean, those things matter. That's the kind of language that is inflammatory.
So the president is really going to try to be drawing some more policy contrast when he hits the trail again in Nevada later today, guys.
So, Monica, we know there was a growing chorus of Democrats calling for President Biden to step aside as the Democratic nominee before the assassination attempt here this last weekend. Now that Mr. Trump has announced his VP running mate, the classified documents case has been dismissed, do we think we're going to see Democrats re-rally behind him, or are those conversations still going on behind the scenes?
Privately, I think Democrats are still anxious about this, and they are discussing whether some who maybe were going to come out in the last couple of days before the events of the weekend and say that they think the president should step aside and shouldn't be the nominee, they're trying to figure out whether they're still going to do that publicly. Are they going to do that as a group? Are they going to wait? Or is this conversation kind of going to recede into the background as it has in these last couple of days? But President Biden says he is completely firm in his decision, that he's really not reconsidering this, that he fully plans to go full steam ahead. As you see, again, he's campaigning. He's going to be lining up all these other events. But here's a little bit more about what he had to say about his future and what he's thinking about.
Look, I've been doing this a long time. The idea that I'm the old guy, I am. I'm old. But I'm only 3 years older than Trump, number one. And number two, my mental acuity has been pretty damn good. I've gotten more done than any president has in a long, long time, in 3.5 years. So I'm willing to be judged on that.
And of course, we're talking about the Republican National Convention a lot this week, but the Rules Committee for the Democratic National Convention, where he will be formally nominated, some of those key decisions about how that could happen actually in anticipation of the August 19th gathering, that's going to take place at the end of this week. So we may know more about that process really soon.
All right, Monica Alba, thank you very much.
Much more to come here on Morning News Now. Later this hour, cutting ties. More people are choosing to stop contacting family members, and they're doing it for their mental health.
Yeah, we're going to unpack that trend and what to consider before you hit block in our weekly check-in, and also
more dangerous thunderstorms today with severe travel impacts on a lot of major airports. I'll give you the timing and all those details coming up next.
We're back now with developing news out of Gaza. More than 20 people are reported dead, dozens more injured from an Israeli airstrike on a school sheltering Palestinians.
NBC News correspondent Danielle Hamamdin joins us with the latest on that and other world news. Good morning, Danielle.
Good morning to you. That's right. We start in Israel, where bombardments of central Gaza overnight have killed at least 24 people, including 10 children and 4 women. This is according to local hospital officials. Israel has been striking southern and central Gaza to put more pressure on Hamas. Over the weekend, it targeted some of the most senior Hamas leaders. The Israeli military claims those leaders were located in a compound in an area called Mawazi, which has been sheltering thousands of innocent civilians. Israeli authorities deny the area was a tented camp. The death toll is impossible to independently verify, but Palestinian officials say 90 people were killed then. The European Union's top diplomat calling that massive weekend strike unbearable and unacceptable. As for negotiations on a ceasefire and a hostage deal, Hamas says those talks are still ongoing. Switching gears now to soccer. This happening in Miami, where the 71-year-old head of the Colombian Soccer Federation was arrested along with his son. Police say they've been accused of fighting security guards after the Copa America final. That saw chaotic scenes around the stadium. The Colombia-Argentina game started over an hour late. A lockdown was put in place, which meant fans were stuck outside. Videos on social media showed security scuffling with fans attempting to breach the gates. And finally, a controversial plan to boost a lagging economy. I'm talking about Thailand and its plan to hand out $13.8 billion to citizen, billions with a B. It comes out to roughly 9,000 Thai baht per person. That's $250 in digital money, not physical cash, to be spent at eligible local businesses. It's ambitious. It's been heavily criticized. And registration, it's been announced, it's starting in August.
Interesting to see what the impact of that is.
Definitely.
All right, Danielle, thank you.
Well, back here in the States, more than 500,000 people are without power this morning. That's after a storm system ripped across the Midwest overnight. Destructive winds and heavy rain spawned multiple reports of tornadoes.
The Chicagoland area was hit quite hard with a ground stop ordered at O'Hare International Airport. Officials say multiple tornadoes downed trees and power lines across the city. So far, no injuries have been reported.
Let's get a closer look at this with your Morning News Now forecast.
Meteorologist Bill Cairns is with us this morning. Hey, Bill, good to see you.
Hey, good morning, guys. And what a scene at O'Hare Airport last night. So there's a tornado warning at the airport. And of course, people are getting on planes, getting off planes. The ground stopped. And so people were stuck on their planes. The tower was evacuated. Everyone in the terminals was sent to the tornado shelters. And there's at least one video out there of a pilot telling the people on the plane, we're stuck here. We're going to go through this tornado on the plane because we can't get off the plane. It's not safe. It was just a wild situation. Thankfully, no one was hurt. No one was harmed. The tornado was on the weaker side. But we still have about 500,000 people without power right now in northern Illinois and portions of Indiana. Most of those severe thunderstorms are done with, but we still have a lot of heavy rain. Numerous flash flood warnings. The worst are right around Mount Vernon, Illinois. We've had about 4 inches of rain. You can see the Mount Vernon area right here. Look at all the lightning strikes, and it's still pouring in that region too. So the worst travel this morning by far is Interstate 64 here through portions of Illinois. Not a pretty morning in and around Kansas either. This is Manhattan, Kansas. University of Kansas State is located here. And look at all the lightning with that thunderstorm coming in even early this morning. So it's hot, it's humid. We got a lot of energy available for storms today. We're going to see some in areas of Nebraska and Kansas, but the big travel impacts are going to be in the east. We got about Albany, New York to New York, Philly, D.C. Everyone is included in this with the chance of these thunderstorms. And then tomorrow we're going to do it again. So the airports are going to be a mess, especially late in the afternoon to the evening, up and down that I-95 corridor. And of course, it's still a little hot and steamy out there too. About 111 million people are under our heat alerts. Yesterday was 101 in Washington, D.C. The day before was 101, and today we are going to go for 102 at Reagan National Airport. This will all come to a crashing halt by the time we get to Thursday. We just have to survive till then.
All right, just a few more days to go. Bill, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Bill.
it.
Good to see you. Missed you. Coming up, questions and criticism over the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, including how the gunman got access to the rooftop where he fired shots.
Up next, we're going to have the latest on the investigation and the calls for change. This is Morning News Now. Welcome back. The assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump is raising widespread concerns about the Secret Service and its security protocols.
In an NBC News exclusive report, two sources familiar with the agency's operations say the rooftop where the gunman shot at Trump from was identified as a security risk before the rally.
NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us with the latest on this. Julia, good morning. So walk us through what we've learned. I mean, I think the big question does seem to be if the rooftop was identified as a security risk prior to the rally, why does it seem that it wasn't better secured?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. So we know that before a president or any protectee of Secret Service like Donald Trump is now goes to a location, especially to do a public appearance like this, they do an advance team for security. And that means they go and they look basically where this person will be speaking, and they look at every vantage point. And one of those places that was identified as a possible vantage point where someone would be able to fire upon the speaker was that rooftop. Now, what the Secret Service did is that they left that rooftop outside of their secure perimeter and left it to local law enforcement. They say this is very common. Anywhere they go, they work with local law enforcement. They say they know the areas best. But a lot of people are saying the Secret Service ultimately was responsible for that, and they're pointing the finger too much at local law enforcement. Another thing in that same vein we're learning just overnight, Joe, is that the Secret Service was notified by local police that they were looking for the shooter in the crowd. He was identified as a suspicious person for having strange activity right outside those magnetometers where Secret Service scans rally goers on their way into the rally. A lot of the locals there, a lot of the people attending the rally, phoned the police, said he was suspicious. The police started looking for him. They lost him in the crowd. During that search, they alerted Secret Service. The police later located him on the roof and, of course, weren't able to bring him down before he did fire off his rifle. But that also moves up our timeline. It's not that the Secret Service found out about this possible threat right at the moment of those shots being fired. They knew local police were looking for a suspicious person ahead of time. Now, perhaps they get calls like that all the time. There could be people who seem suspicious who turn out not to be, but it's more information we have, especially as we're seeing pressure build on the Secret Service for more answers, and we're seeing more investigations launched throughout the government to get to the bottom of what went wrong here.
Yeah, it's more information that almost just makes that question of how could this have happened seem like bold and underlined at this point. Julia, congressional committees are wasting no time in seeking answers from the Secret Service. In fact, lawmakers are already launching multi-committee investigations into what happened. What are they going to be looking to determine specifically with those investigations?
Well, they're going to want answers going all the way back to what was known about this site. They're also going to want to put together that timeline just like we have. They're also going to want to look into why this ultimately fell outside the security perimeter of the Secret Service, why they left this to local law enforcement, and what that communication with local law enforcement would have been like. Was it the county? Was it the township? Was it the state that was ultimately responsible? And what did they know in those moments leading up, particularly as we've heard from some bystanders saying that they saw him on the roof for 3 to 4 minutes before those shots were fired off. So they're going to be asking a lot of questions of the Secret Service. And there's also an independent review panel being launched from the Department of Homeland Security and the White House that we just heard about yesterday. Unfortunately, what can happen from a journalist point of view when those executive independent review panels come together is it means sometimes we're cut out of some of the information because they can say it's under investigation. We can't share that with you right now. So it might mean more answers down the road, but in the short term, it can actually block us from getting some of this information we want to get out to the public.
Julia, speaking with experts, do they say there are changes that need to be made in the Secret Service moving forward?
Yeah, certainly no shortage of suggestions here. A big one I'm hearing is that the Secret Service needs to look seriously at drone surveillance, that if they were able to get a drone only flown by the Secret Service, no outsiders, who could have gone up and had aerial surveillance of this situation. They could have seen him in time. There's also a lot of questions about whether or not they need more resources around protectees other than the president. People like former President Trump, people like congressional members of top leadership, people like cabinet members. What does this mean in this new era of threats, domestic terrorism, heightened political rhetoric? What should they be doing for security? And perhaps they also needed another suggestion I'm hearing is having plainclothes officers who could have gone beyond the perimeter to help local police in their search for the suspicious person.
All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you so much.
Now it is time for our weekly mental health check-in. We are kicking things off with a new proposal that could mean tens of millions of people could get coverage for digital mental health services like therapy apps.
Plus, time heals a lot of things, but can getting older help make people less narcissistic?
Well, for all that and more, we are joined by Dr. Erica Richards. She's the chair and medical director of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at Sibley Memorial Hospital. Dr. Richards, always great to see you. Good morning. So let's jump right in here. This new Medicare proposal means digital mental health services. So that's things like apps, sensors, even virtual reality, which is interesting, could potentially get covered by insurance starting next year. What do you think of that? How effective could that be?
Good morning, Savannah. This could be very effective. So the reason this is important is because the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services essentially sets the gold standard a lot of times for what insurance companies are willing to pay for, what's accepted. Now, important to note that these digital platforms must still be approved by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So they still require proof, studies, that they are effective and could be helpful. The reason this is important is because similar to the increase that we've seen in people being treated through telemedicine, this increases access to those that are willing to try to improve their mental health.
Here's one that's going to resonate with a lot of folks. People are going viral for sharing personal stories about actually cutting ties with their families for the sake of their mental health. They're calling it going no contact. What do you think? What are the situations where this does make sense for people?
So, Joe, this is really a question of how to heal and move forward from childhood trauma. The reason that this is important is because that trauma can be real, that trauma can be perceived. And essentially, a lot of the details lie in communication. So there's a therapist on social media who is encouraging, once it's identified as the real sticking point, as the main issue in someone's mental health, they've encouraged people to consider this no contact discussion and essentially saying, I am cutting off the people that are toxic in my life. However, there's not proof that this really works. And what we want to encourage people to do is really make this an individual decision. What are your needs? What communication can you establish? There's other therapy. There's therapy that will really talk about what happened, what do I think was the problem, and can we get to a resolution that may not require a no contact issue.
Finally, let's talk about that one, Joe T's narcissism. So first, a definition here. If somebody has a narcissistic personality disorder, they are typically impulsive, volatile, attention-seeking, they lack empathy. A new study, this is interesting though, suggesting these behaviors might improve as someone gets older. What do you make of this one?
So this is a study from the American Psychological Association where they looked at over 35,000 people across several smaller studies. And Savannah, the characteristics, the traits that you mentioned are some listed. I know that a lot of people will talk about narcissism and knowing a narcissist. There's very strict criteria from the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual for the definition of narcissism, where about 5 of these 9 characteristics in order to meet the criteria. But the study does show that this does improve over time. Now, one of the reasons it's thought that as people age and they take on more responsibilities, parenthood, you know, talking about whether or not there's a role in the job, that it does get better, but it still stays in the same magnitude that it was for their peers.
Important there to define that, especially as that becomes a word that's really like all over TikTok and people are self-diagnosing. Dr. Erica Richards, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Coming up, we are talking about conservatives and climate change.
Yep, next one, groups' efforts to get Republicans to take action for the environment. You are watching Morning News Now.
Welcome back. Let's return to our coverage of the Republican National Convention, which went on as planned after the assassination attempt against former President Trump. Delegates, guests, and members of Mr. Trump's family offered their reactions to the attempt on his life. Here's some of what they had to say.
We should all be thankful right now that we are able to cast our votes for President Donald J. Trump after what took place on Saturday.
And we love a fighter, and Donald Trump is a proven fighter.
I had a spectrum of emotions. The first one was fear. What was happening? Then it turned into anger. Then it turned into disgust. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, everyone should be bothered.
There's evil in the world all over, and I'm sorry that it had to happen here in the United States of America, because the people in our country, I don't believe even a fraction of them would want something like that to happen.
I remember when Ronald Reagan was shot, and I remember exactly where I was. And so what you do is it's just like a moment in time that just stands still.
I've known Trump for 30 years, and you watch somebody you know getting shot in real time. It's pretty horrifying.
We need to be self-aware as we celebrate over the next 4 or 5 days. There's a gentleman that did not go home after a campaign rally in Pennsylvania.
We have crossed a watershed. We were right at the brink of falling apart as a country and potentially drifting towards a civil war. And I think that this shocked everybody.
Talk to me about how your father's doing.
He's doing great. I mean, just his resolve is only further strengthened. I think he did spend a lot of time changing up the message of what it's been. He's been under constant attack, but it's a different time in America. A lot's happened in 48 hours.
You can get more coverage of this year's Republican National Convention right here on News Now, starting at 4 p.m. Eastern, and then on NBC starting at 10 p.m. Eastern.
Well, we are sticking with the RNC, and we are following one group's efforts to get Republicans to take action on climate change. According to a Pew Research Center survey, only 12% of Republicans say dealing with climate change should be a top priority for the president and Congress. But the founder of the American Conservation Coalition hopes to change that. NBC News national climate reporter Chase Kane spoke with him about his push to engage the right on climate change.
Wisconsin may be a purple state, but when it comes to climate change, there's actually a lot of agreement here. Nearly 70% understand the reality of global warming, and roughly 75% of people in Wisconsin support various climate policies, everything from expanding wind and solar to regulating carbon dioxide emissions. But politics and policies aside, a new report calculates exactly how much climate change is already costing Wisconsin taxpayers.
17 disasters causing at least $1 billion in damage each have hit Wisconsin in just the last 3 years. And to adapt to climate-amplified floods, storms, and heat waves, the Center for Climate Integrity estimates the state will need to spend $1 billion every year. That's nearly $17 billion by 2040. And that doesn't even count the enormous climate costs to Wisconsin's 58,000 farms.
Who's going to pay for that? And that's what this report's about. Try to put climate change in sort of a different perspective. Right. Let's not just talk about left and right and, partisan divide on climate change. Let's talk about the nuts and bolts of what it really means for communities, which is spending a lot of money to adapt.
The report comes as young conservatives hope for a turning point on climate action.
When they ask me what I do, I'm like, I try to get conservatives active on environmental issues. And they're like, oh, man, how's that going? And I'm like, actually, a lot better than you'd think. Even with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, who has been hesitant to embrace climate change, obviously, he's even changed his tune over the last few weeks.
I want absolutely immaculate clean water, and I want absolutely clean air.
He released some talking points before the debate that were more about lowering carbon emissions in America. That's not an accident.
Benji Backer wrote The Conservative Environmentalist and founded the American Conservation Coalition to engage the right on climate change, which is what they're going to continue pushing at the RNC.
This is an issue about leaving a legacy for America, right? Does America lead the world in moving towards sustainable solutions, or do we get caught up in the culture wars and let other countries do that? That message is resonating with the right. I do not believe that the RNC will allow climate denial to be a part of the equation anymore.
Despite not mentioning climate change directly, the Republican Party's draft of their platform does call for expanding nuclear power and streamlining energy permitting, which might help wind and solar connect to the grid more quickly. And all those things could help the U.S. cut our emissions. In Milwaukee, I'm national climate reporter Chase Kane.
Speaking of climate change, General Motors CEO says the company is putting the brakes on its ambitious goal to produce 1 million electric vehicles by the end of next year.
That's big news. CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with that and other financial news for us. Hey, Silvana, good morning.
Savannah, Joe, good morning to you. Yes, so General Motors CEO Mary Barra says the automaker won't have the production capacity in place to meet its goal of building 1 million electric vehicles by the end of next year. Now, speaking at a CNBC event, Barra says GM is currently seeing a slowdown in deliveries, and customer demand will dictate how fast the company can get to that sales target. GM is in the process of ramping up production of its electric Chevy Blazer SUV and smaller Equinox model, which it hopes will boost sales. The Amazon Dash buttons have officially been discontinued. The stick-on buttons let customers reorder popular household items. Introduced in 2014, the Dash buttons were $5 each and were available for several products from paper towels to laundry detergent. CNET reports existing Dash buttons will continue to work as long as the public keeps using them. And YouTube Music is testing a new feature that lets you use AI to generate a playlist by describing exactly what you want to hear. You can choose from prompts such as catchy pop songs or upbeat anthems, or enter your own description. Spotify has a similar feature. YouTube Music is also rolling out a tool that lets you search for a specific song by singing, humming, or playing it out loud, guys. I think this works really well for karaoke in the car.
Yeah.
Depends on how well you sing or hum, though.
In the car, I think is good. In the car, I think it'll work.
Right. It'll be interesting because have you ever tried to do that, like with, let's say, with Shazam, but with AI? I wonder how it might actually be able to figure it out.
I'm hopeful.
That
Not
is
mine,
how our
no,
music
but
careers will start. All right, Silvana, thank you so much.
You got it. Coming up, it's being called Christmas in July.
That's right. Amazon's highly anticipated Prime Day is underway. We're going to run you through the biggest deals next on Morning News. We are finally getting a look at what stranger things have been going on in Hawkins, Indiana. To celebrate the 8th anniversary of the release of the fan favorite, Netflix posted a look behind the scenes of production on the 5th and final season of the hit show. Producers do confirm they're halfway done with filming. Viewers can expect season 5 sometime next year. In the teaser, the cast discussed growing up on the show and getting the original gang back together one final time to hopefully save the world.
Are you into this?
I've never watched it. Have you?
I was so into the first season, yes, and I loved it. And then, I don't know.
You gotta catch up for season 5.
Not that the second wasn't good. I just didn't finish it. So that's very interesting. Yeah, there you go. All right, attention all Amazon members. It's officially Christmas in July. That's right. It's Prime Day today and tomorrow. The online retail giant is hosting its biggest summer sale.
That makes it Prime Days, right?
Yeah, anyway. I know.
The annual online shopping event has become one of the biggest days of the year for retail sales. So this morning, we're giving you the inside scoop on some of those steals and deals.
Joining us with more is David Kender. He is the editor-in-chief of USA Today's Review. David, good morning. Thanks for being here. So last year, Amazon actually said that this is kind of going to be the same thing again. The 2-day sale was its biggest sales days ever. Tell us, remind us how this even started. Like, why did they start Prime Day and it became this huge deal? And do you think that this year could be as big as last year or even beat it?
So today is Prime Day. It started this morning. It's going to run through tomorrow night. It started way back in 2015, so we're actually in the 9th year of Prime Day. And it's no shock that they created it to boost sales. It was very effective. It's had a consistent pattern of growth since 2015. Analysts are expecting that it could pull in about $14 billion in consumer sales this year just for this 2-day event. That's up about 10.5% from the previous year. So it's really been on a great trajectory.
Let's jump into what folks are waiting for, the sales. What items are we seeing the best deals for so far?
So our team is scouring Amazon.com right now. What we found is some of the best. The Apple AirPods Pro are $169. That's 32% off. Amazon Echo Dot is just $25. That's 50% off. The Apple AirTags for 4-pack for $75. Anything made by Amazon is probably going to get a big discount, and that's going to include Kindles, Fire TV sticks, all of their many fashion brands, things like that. It's not just a great time to save on big ticket items, though. Prime Day is a great time of year to just buy those little everyday things that you're going to buy anyway. Things like Crest strips, Tide stain sticks, K-cups for your Keurig coffee maker, things like that. Chances are most of them are on some sort of discount.
Okay, these days overwhelm me so much because you just said like 10 things that I'm like, I'm always like, I should get a head start on this, and then I just don't. I forget that it's coming. Yeah, what should we not buy right now, maybe to help people out? Anything that you think is going to be on a better sale later?
Not much, actually. It's not a great time of year to buy furniture, at least on Amazon. Also, TVs tend to have their biggest deals around Cyber Monday. But my advice to all consumers is to be aware that, yes, there's a lot of great products on sale, but there's also a lot of not so great stuff on sale as well. So if it's a brand that you're not familiar with, my recommendation is to open another tab in the browser and go to a site like review.com or some other editorial site where you're going to get recommendations, advice, reviews. You're going to get a vetted list of stuff that experts have actually checked out and had their hands on. That's why review sites are here. We want to do the heavy lifting for you. And then you can just jump right from there back to Amazon and feel confident with your purchase.
This has kind of become contagious. So if you aren't a Prime member, are there competing sales at any other big name retailers that you can take advantage of? And we have just under a minute here.
Yes, there is. Amazon really did an effective job of churning the waters and getting people hyped up to save money in July. So some of the noteworthy retailers that are having big sales: Nordstrom, Walmart, Target. But there's a good chance that if you have a preferred retailer, someone you just like, pop over to their website. There's a decent chance they're having a sale right now, too.
Wow, that is really good news. I'm like taking notes as you're talking, so I'm making sure I go
all the
look
things
up.
you're going to buy today and tomorrow, because it's days. Days.
David Kender, thank you very much for joining us on day one. We appreciate the tips. Good to see you.
Happy shopping.
That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Stay with us, though. The news continues right now. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm Savannah Sellers.
I'm Joe Fryer. Right now on Morning News Now, Donald Trump is officially the Republican nominee for president. In a late-night surprise for an adoring crowd, the former president appeared in public for the first time since that attempt on his life. He was there to cheer on his newly announced running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. An announcement following a stunning legal victory for the Republican nominee, a federal judge tossing out the classified documents case against him. We are breaking it all down. Plus, we're learning new details about the attempted assassination of the former president, what investigators are now saying about the shooter and the warning before he opened fire. Also this morning, in an exclusive interview with NBC News, President Biden speaking out against political violence, but not backing down on his characterizations of former President Trump.
I'm not the guy who said that we'll accept the outcome of this election automatically. You can't only love your country when you win.
What he told our own Lester Holt about his private conversation with Mr. Trump and about calls for him to step aside. And as the political climate in our country reaches a boiling point, we're sitting down with an expert to discuss how you can process the stress now and moving forward. Good to have you with us. We begin this hour with the Republican National Convention as day 2 gets underway today.
That's right. Former President Trump officially became the party's nominee after a roll call of the states. And then last night, he made his first public appearance since that assassination attempt against him during a rally on Saturday in Pennsylvania. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance became Mr. Trump's running mate, joining the Republican ticket for the general election. NBC News senior Washington correspondent and News Now anchor Hallie Jackson has the latest on all of this from Milwaukee.
Overnight, Republicans roaring at the first glimpse of former President Trump in the convention hall. Donald J. Trump. His bandaged ear clearly visible in his unscheduled appearance. The crowd mirroring the moments after Saturday's assassination attempt when Mr. Trump pumped his fist and mouthed the word fight. The former president, for the first time, appearing alongside his newly picked running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. The 39-year-old first-term senator applauded on the convention floor. The GOP ticket now official after the candidates formally received enough delegates to claim the nomination.
The Republican nominee for President of the United States of America.
Despite the celebration, the shadow of the assassination attempt looming. The former president's son, Eric, with Savannah.
Do you think your father is reconsidering some of his own rhetoric on the campaign trail?
Yeah, probably on both sides. I think everybody's rhetoric just needs to change. It does. No one can stop the United States of America if we're together, and I think so much of the tone of this whole convention is going to be exactly that.
Former President Trump says he's now preparing a convention speech that's more unifying, as opposed to what he described to the Washington Examiner as an initial rip-roarer against President Biden. On day one of the RNC, the party looking to make inroads with traditionally Democratic-leaning groups like union workers.
It's an honor to be the first Teamster in our 121-year history to address the Republican National Convention.
And the selection of Vance as Mr. Trump's running mate, a signal the campaign is looking to boost turnout in key battlegrounds. The senator telling Fox News the president told him,
"You could help me in some of these Midwestern states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and so forth."
The author of Hillbilly Elegy and a Marine veteran, seen as the next generation of the MAGA movement. His name already added to the campaign plane.
Our thanks to Hallie Jackson for that report. Well, we will have much more from the Republican National Convention throughout the day here on NBC News. Now, our extensive live coverage of Day 2 gets underway at 4 p.m. Eastern. We will also have primetime coverage tonight on NBC.
We are learning new details about the attempted assassination of former President Trump. This morning, we're learning more about the interactions the shooter may have had with law enforcement officers near the event, as his motive continues to elude investigators. NBC's Stephanie Gosk has the latest from Butler, Pennsylvania.
The shooter did not fire many rounds before he was located by snipers and killed. But were there opportunities missed to stop him before he got on that rooftop? The Secret Service says the building fell outside of their security perimeter, even though it was nearly 150 yards from the podium. They say the responsibility was primarily local law enforcement's.
This morning, new questions about whether opportunities were missed to stop Thomas Crooks before he took aim at former President Donald Trump.
Take a look at what happened.
Crooks was shot and killed by Secret Service snipers after he opened fire with an AR-15 style rifle, just 148 yards from the former president's podium.
He's on the roof! He's right here! Right on the roof!
NBC News now learning Crooks was spotted before he got on the roof. Rally-goers on their way in noticed Crooks pacing and behaving strangely near the metal detectors, according to 4 officials. They alerted local police, who began pursuing Crooks on foot. A U.S. official telling NBC News that during the pursuit, the officers told Secret Service they were looking for a suspicious person in the area. It's not clear when Secret Service was notified.
Look, there he is right there.
But Crooks did make it onto the rooftop. 2 senior officials telling NBC News he had a Home Depot receipt for a ladder when they searched his body. Officials have not confirmed if that ladder was found on site. NBC News learning 2 local police officers approached Crooks before he opened fire, but couldn't stop him. The head of the Secret Service telling ABC News local police were actually stationed inside that same building. A Secret Service spokesman says the location of the roof fell outside of their central security perimeter and was the primary responsibility of local law enforcement. The Department of Homeland Security, which oversees the U.S. Secret Service, now conducting a review. The DHS secretary acknowledging mistakes were made.
When I say that something like this cannot happen, we are speaking of a failure.
Senior FBI officials tell NBC News they have cracked open Crooks' cell phone, but it has not revealed a motive so far. They are working around the clock analyzing his electronics. We are also learning from senior officials that when they searched the family home, they found nearly a dozen weapons. Back to you.
All right, Stephanie, thank you.
Let's talk more about this with NBC News law enforcement analyst Jim Kavanaugh. Jim, thanks for joining us. So let's start here on the motive. As we heard from Stephanie, authorities still haven't found really anything when it comes to that. Help us understand why that makes an investigation like this more challenging and what it ultimately means if authorities end up being unable to determine a motive.
Well, you know, there's always a motive, and we always want to know it. It's not always needed in a prosecution, but it does help investigators, and it does clarify the situation. But we have to take a step back and look at the overall picture of the guy, because sometimes the little things can tell us the motive. And, you know, looking at it overall from a distance, I believe this motive here falls into what I call the power rubric, the giant rubric of power, as opposed to greed, hate, revenge, or escape, which are the motives for violent crime, including assassination. And I see it as a power motive, and as a guy who wanted infamy. Because this is an invisible man. This guy is invisible. He's in the lunchroom alone. Nobody has any friends. He has no social media presence. He's not really political. I mean, he gave $15 or somehow $15 when he was 17 years old to some Democratic thing, or he could have purchased something. We don't even know what that is. And his friends say he was conservative Republican. I'd say he's not really political at all, because he's not really old enough to be much. He's 20 years old, so it doesn't sound like he's some sort of political operative. I think he's the invisible man. He wanted to be visible. There's one telling thing too, that he was kind of pushed out of a local school gun shooting club. They said he wasn't a good shot, which he came to prove, since he missed the president with all of his shots except one which grazed his ear. But he may have taken that really to heart and showed them, well, I'm going to show them what a good shot I am. He also always wore camo, so he might have been very much into shooting, hunting sports. And so it was sort of an identity for him. So to be pushed out of, you know, a shooting club, we don't see that as big. The public doesn't. But to this guy, it could have been huge to him. And, you know, it's one of those things, well, I'll show them, you know, and I'll be famous, and I'm a good shot, and I'm going to show you how good a shot I am. So I think we're looking at an infamy motive, you know, like, say, the invisible man who wanted to become visible.
Jim, let's talk about the response by law enforcement on that day and some of the concerning details Stephanie just reported. NBC News learning police notified the Secret Service about a suspicious person at the rally. He was later identified as the shooter, but it's not clear when the Secret Service was alerted. How concerned are you about some of these new details we're learning? Should this have been prevented?
Absolutely, it should have been prevented. The major failure, though, and we can find all the other little failures along the way, because they're all trying to put Band-Aids on the big failure, and which is not to have uniformed officers, Secret Service or police, on the roof of any building that's within rifle range of the dais and the protectee. Because, look, Joe, this is not thousands of buildings. I mean, if you look at an aerial shot there's this series of buildings where the shot came from, a few roofs there, and there's a few sheds. I mean, this doesn't take half a dozen cops. And they could easily have been stationed on there. They don't have to be up there for 24 hours. They just have to be up there when the protectee is on the dais. So that's the great failure. And, you know, the Secret Service commander could have looked around and said, there's nobody on the building roof here. There's no police on that roof. There's no police on that roof. Get them up there before the protectee comes out. That's the big failure. Now we wanting to start talking about all, you know, communications and delays. Look, command posts are set up. I've been on these many times. Command posts are set up. In the command post, on site, all the agencies are there. If a radio call comes in from the police, the Secret Service has it immediately. If it comes in from the Secret Service, the police have it immediately. That exchange happens. So any delay might be just in decision-making and what's going on, trying to figure it out.
All right, Jim, as always, we so appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Former President Donald Trump was handed a major legal win yesterday after a Florida federal judge, Aileen Cannon, dismissed the classified documents case against him.
In her 93-page decision, Judge Cannon ruled special counsel Jack Smith was unconstitutionally appointed to the case by Attorney General Merrick Garland. The Justice Department has already vowed to appeal the decision, saying, quote, the dismissal of the case deviates from the uniform conclusion of all previous courts to have considered the issue that the Attorney General is statutorily authorized to appoint a special counsel.
Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Angela Senadella for more on this. So walk us through how the judge came to this decision, because it is controversial and does seem to go against decades of precedent, right?
Yes, it is very controversial. And to me, I think the biggest takeaway of all of this is that it could have all been evaded if only the Justice Department had used their own division. So the reason why the Justice Department appointed a special prosecutor to begin with is to attempt to have an impartiality to this whole investigation, right? So when you look at the intention and the incentive of this decision, which the judge made, it is really going to go in the face of that. So what the judge decided here was that Jack Smith was not appointed properly because Merrick Garland doesn't have the authority by the Constitution to appoint an officer under him to prosecute the president, because he was theoretically just a private citizen, even though he was previously an acting U.S. attorney and also a war crimes prosecutor. That wasn't enough. He needed confirmation from Congress. So the judge here based her decision on the separation of powers, saying that in this case, Congress needed to have confirmed Jack Smith. Because they didn't, the entire case is dismissed. But dismissed, in this case, without prejudice, which means that it could be brought again.
And let's talk about what we might see next, an appeal. What does that process look like? How quickly do you expect that? And then what does it ultimately mean could happen should that go forward?
Right. So the Justice Department has a few options here. First is a direct appeal, and I expect to see this overturned on appeal, just given the lack of precedent to rule in Cannon's decision in the past. But the other option here is for the Justice Department to bring this case directly, either through Main Justice or through a U.S. attorney. So Cannon's issue here was that Jack Smith did not get confirmed by Congress. Every U.S. attorney in this country has been confirmed by Congress. So had Merrick Garland used someone from his department, Cannon's opinion, Cannon's decision wouldn't be relevant here. So they still have the option to do that right now.
As many people have pointed out, Trump appointed Cannon back in 2020. Many Democrats say if this does end up, the case resumes, she should be taken off of it. She's had past decisions, too, that have been controversial and overturned by appeals courts. But how do you actually get a judge off a case? How hard would that process?
Yeah, Joe, you're right there in that it's extremely hard. There has to have been a clear and egregious and lengthy record of really just wrong rulings. And it's difficult to claim that a ruling is not just impartial, but is really wrong if the record is not based in some real misconduct, right? I do think defendants in this case have a much better chance because they're the ones who have a constitutional right here to a fair trial. So if you're arguing that the judge was not impartial to the defendant, that the chance of getting that judge off the case are much higher. But here it's the prosecution, which doesn't have a constitutional right to a fair trial.
All right. Angela Sanadella, thank you so much.
As always. Well, this morning we have an NBC News exclusive interview with President Biden. The president sat down with nightly news anchor Lester Holt yesterday for his first interview since the assassination attempt against former President Trump this weekend. They discussed the upcoming election and how we need to move forward as a nation. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander joins us with more on the interview. Peter, good morning.
Savannah, good morning. The president shared new details about his call with Mr. Trump that happened just hours after the assassination attempt, saying that he told the former president how concerned he was about him and said that he and the First Lady were praying for him. And Lester notably also asked President Biden about some of his comments, including one on a private call with donors last week where President Biden was arguing Mr. Trump had gotten too little scrutiny for his stances, his rhetoric, his lack of campaigning, and said it was time to put Trump in the bullseye.
You called your opponent an existential threat on a call a week ago. You said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate that.
I didn't say crosshairs. I was talking about focus on. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term is bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate.
The president lamenting how ugly the political climate has become.
I've never seen a circumstance where you ride through certain rural areas of the country and people have signs there, big Trump signs with a middle sign saying F Biden and a little kid standing there putting up his middle finger. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that is just inflammatory and a kind of viciousness.
President Biden also downplaying Democratic defections, those lawmakers in his own party urging him to step aside.
Who do you listen to on deeply personal issues like the decisions whether to stay in the race or not?
Me. Look, I've been doing this a long time. The idea that I'm the old guy, I am. I'm old. But I'm only 3 years older than Trump, number one. And number two, my mental acuity has been pretty damn good. I've gotten more done than any president has in a long, long time, in 3.5 years.
And before leaving for Las Vegas yesterday, the president also said that J.D. Vance, Mr. Trump's VP pick, is a, quote, clone of Trump on the issues, and said he did not see any difference between them. The president, whose campaign briefly paused its TV ads after the shooting, is now back on the road again, where he will address the NAACP today in Nevada. Joe and Savannah.
All right, Peter, thank you so much. Up next, we're taking a deep dive, actually, as was just mentioned by Peter there, into Donald Trump's new running mate, J.D. Vance.
How the Ohio senator went from fierce critic to staunch ally. Next.
You do not want to win or be in the lead. It already feels like 91 in the 8 a.m. hour in Newark and Wilmington. I'll let you know who's going to be the hottest spot in the country coming up next.
We're back with more on the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. We're taking a closer look at Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, who has been tapped as former President Trump's running mate. Senator Vance was once a harsh critic of Mr. Trump. NBC's Garrett Hake joins us from Milwaukee with more on that. Garrett, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning. Yeah, there's no question that J.D. Vance has become an effective evangelist for Donald Trump's MAGA makeover of the Republican Party. But now he's going to have to convince folks, as a relatively untested first-term senator, that he's ready to be a heartbeat away from the presidency.
Ohio Senator J.D. Vance stepping into the brightest spotlight of his young political career, appearing side by side with Donald Trump overnight at the Republican National Convention. After just 2 years in the Senate, he's now Mr. Trump's running mate. Vance sharing with Fox News how the former president offered him a spot on the GOP ticket.
Said, look, I think we're going to go save this country. I think you're the guy who can help me in the best way. You can help me govern. You can help me win.
The 39-year-old Vance, perhaps best known for his best-selling memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, now becoming the first millennial on a major party presidential ticket. He is also the first veteran of the War on Terror, serving in Iraq as a U.S. Marine in public affairs. The father of 3 is married to Usha Vance, a corporate litigator and the daughter of Indian immigrants. In 2016, Vance repeatedly condemned then-candidate Trump.
I'm a never Trump guy. I never liked him. I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place.
Vance also called Trump dangerous and unfit for office, suggesting Mr. Trump could become, quote, America's Hitler in private conversations, according to multiple reports. Hannity asking Vance about using that phrase.
I don't hide from that.
Now, Vance is a vocal America First convert, opposing abortion rights and aid to Ukraine, and backing Mr. Trump's false claims of a stolen 2020 election.
I was certainly skeptical of Donald Trump in 2016, but President Trump was a great president, and he changed my mind. I think he changed the minds of a lot of Americans.
RNC co-chair Laura Trump telling NBC News that Vance is now the future of Donald Trump's GOP.
I think he'll be a great partner, and I think he'll be a great advocate for this country.
Joe, you can expect Democrats to attack Vance for being insincere in his conversion to Trumpism and for his position on abortion, which is actually to the right of Donald Trump's. He's supported a federal abortion ban without exceptions in the past, although that is not Donald Trump's opinion. As for Republicans in the Trump campaign, they think that Vance's turn from Trump opponent to Trump supporter is kind of a permission structure for people out in the country who may not like Donald Trump either, to say, if J.D. Vance can change his mind, perhaps I should too.
All right, Garrett, thank you so much.
We are now joined by NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen on this. John, good morning. So we knew Senator Vance was on the short list to become Mr. Trump's running mate for quite some time, but tell us what we should know about him that we didn't just hear there from Garrett. Why is he joining the ticket?
Look, I think there are a number of reasons, Savannah. One of them is that the 2 elder sons of Donald Trump, that's Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, talked to their father about his choice last week. He was leaning toward Doug Burgum, the North Dakota governor, and the two boys, I guess 2 men, but sons and boys probably forever to Donald Trump, told him that they thought he was making a mistake if he did that. And you know, one source told us that they basically just said JD, 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 and that was something that was influential with their father. But in terms of Vance and what he brings to the ticket, there are those who believe that he'll have some appeal in the Rust Belt, those blue wall states that are so pivotal in the last couple of elections, have been so pivotal in the last couple of elections, meaning Pennsylvania, Michigan, and in Wisconsin. J.D. Vance being from Ohio, not everybody in Michigan loves Ohio in particular, but perhaps having some appeal on that level to folks in that region, and also doubling down on the the sort of MAGA message. If anything, he may have been to the MAGA side of Donald Trump as a senator in his couple of years in that chamber.
He's a relative newcomer to politics, elected just 2 years ago, but this is definitely a meteoric rise. Many of us were first introduced to him through the book Hillbilly Elegy, which was about his childhood. It was about his family. What should we know about his family?
Yeah, I mean, he depicts his childhood in some very bleak terms in some ways in that book, certainly not in all ways. His parents were divorced when he was very young. His mother struggled with addiction, and he was largely raised by, at least in his early life, by his maternal grandparents. And, he now, in terms of his family now, as Garrett mentioned, his wife is Usha Vance. He's got 3 of his own children. And you mentioned Hillbilly Elegy, and I think it's just so fascinating. He writes about his family, writes about his upbringing, and at the time in 2016 when he was attacking Donald Trump on television, he was selling his book to a liberal audience, which very much looked at his book as an explanation of what was going on with the rise of Trumpism. And now in 2024, he is Trump's running mate and selling himself as a sort of populist conservative vice presidential candidate.
All right, John, thank you so much. Well, this morning in the U.S., more than 500,000 people are waking up without power across the Midwest. It comes after a string of dangerous thunderstorms battered parts of Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana overnight, fueling multiple tornadoes in cities like Chicago, where there was a ground stop issued at O'Hare International Airport. As that storm system moves toward the northeast, tens of millions of Americans are under heat alerts for the 3rd straight week. Officials say the temperatures could set more heat records this week. So for more on this, let's get a look at your Morning News Now weather forecast.
Meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now with word that there might be some relief in sight, maybe later this week.
That's all anyone wants to know, right? We know it's hot, it's gross, it's like, when's this going to end? As long as in our minds, if we know when it's going to end, we can get through it. It's just that much better. So we have about 111 million people, so that's, again, about 1/3 of the U.S. population, under some kind of heat alerts or heat warnings. The warnings where it gets really dangerous for people outside, and those go from New Jersey all the way down to South Carolina and from Memphis area towards Little Rock. And as far as the cold front goes, right now it's trying to work its way south into Ohio through areas right around St. Louis and Kansas City. That's why we're getting thunderstorms on that front. And we will get numerous strong storms as this pushes to the East Coast. But it's a slow-moving cold front, unfortunately. So if you're south of it, you're in the soupy air where it feels hard to breathe at times. Little Rock, you should peak today heat index about 110. Baltimore, 110. Raleigh, 107. Charleston, about 111. And then as we go towards the intense mid-Atlantic corridor today, D.C. could be like 102 in the shade with a heat index around 108. New York City, a little bit less than that, closer to the water. You get a tiny bit of relief. Then as we go towards tomorrow, Cincinnati, you get your rewards. St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Rochester. And then we have to wait till Thursday for the coolish air to arrive in D.C. It's amazing how 87 degrees is actually going to feel good compared to how hot it's been. And the same will go for Raleigh, Nashville, and Little Rock. And the thing you'll really notice is at night with the humidity levels dropping, it'll feel a lot more comfortable outside. And as far as the troublesome weather goes, I mentioned that slow-moving cold front's causing problems. We got numerous flash flood warnings in Illinois right now. Flood watches are up all along the southern, just north of the Ohio River here in the southern portions of the Ohio Valley, and the lightning is just intense. This is St. Louis, has been in and out of thunderstorms all morning long. Interstate 64 is a mess. Numerous reports of flash flooding here around the Mount Vernon area and just north of there, and it's still stormy, so that could be a developing story during the day. And I've had my eye on Topeka, Kansas. Severe thunderstorm warning for you right now. Kansas City, you're good, but those storms should be moving your way in about 20 minutes from now or so. So for severe storms that we're going to deal with today, isolated severe storms, Nebraska all the way back down through Kansas. And then as we head into the northeast, this will be late this afternoon popping up, and it should continue through this evening. And I think we're going to have some airport problems, especially D.C., Philly, and New York later this evening. So if you have any flight plans, fans. Keep that in mind. And then tomorrow we do it again as that slow-moving cold front's draped over the region. I-95 specifically from Richmond all the way back up through New York City. About 43 million people at risk for more severe storms as we go through the day tomorrow. Again, it's not going to be too bad. And here's the best map of all. I haven't had a map that looked like this in forever. So this is next week after the weekend. And my apologies to everyone on the West Coast, up through the Rockies into the Montana. But that cooler than average air from Houston, who's been through too much with the hurricane, through the middle of the country, and even the East Coast, instead of being above, this map has been bright red for about a month and a half straight, the extended outlook. We're going to all have to get a little break from our hot, hot summer.
Bring it on.
Love that blue.
Bring it on.
Ooh, right in the middle.
Thank
you, Bill. Great to have you. Today, we are remembering John F. Kennedy Jr., who was killed in a plane crash 25 years ago. Born just days after his father was elected to be president, JFK Jr. grew up in the spotlight and became a symbol of hope after his father was assassinated. Here's NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson, who spoke with the authors of a new book of stories and memories from his closest friends.
Hey there, throughout his 38 years, JFK Jr. was almost always in the spotlight. A favorite of the paparazzi, he was so famous, many people thought they knew him. Now a new book, JFK Jr., offers an intimate portrait from those who knew him best. I sat down with the authors, Rosemary Terenzio and Liz McNeil, at one of John's favorite restaurants here in New York, Bubby's.
My wife and I prepare for a new administration and for a new baby. Thank you.
Born days after his father was elected president in 1960, the world knew John F. Kennedy Jr.'s name before he did. A spotlight that would follow him through childhood joys and tragedies, his professional failures and successes.
Ladies and gentlemen, meet George.
And his marriage to Carolyn Bessette.
America's most eligible bachelor, the closest we had to a crown prince, was married over the weekend.
A seemingly charmed life until the plane he flew with Carolyn and her sister Lauren crashed into the waters off Martha's Vineyard.
It was like a fairy tale without an ending.
Rosemary Terenzio, his chief of staff at George, the magazine he founded, and Liz McNeil of People magazine, now offering the world a fuller picture of the private man living in the public glare. Why this book? Why now?
I wanted to make sure that he is remembered and his rightful place in history is there.
It's really about just the kinds of things that you tell your friends when you're remembering somebody.
Among the book's revelations, JFK Jr.'s attitude to fame, described in a letter to boxer and friend Mike Tyson, after Tyson bit off Evander Holyfield's ear in a fight. I love this line, they crucify saints and anoint fools as kings. Referring to his family, he wrote, "Those who stay fascinating are people who struggle and show themselves to be human."
We've actually encapsulated a human being who struggled, who suffered, who was searching, and who in some ways was just like all the rest of us.
The book does not avoid the less than fairy tale aspects of his life. Why was that important?
Because no one is perfect.
In the last week of his life, all that looked so perfect to the rest of the world was in turmoil, including his marriage. They were in therapy?
Yes, they were.
Couples therapy?
They were in couples therapy.
I think what surprised me was how much pressure he was under. People are looking to him to sort of find funding for George. He's thinking about running for the governor. He's got stresses of marriage.
One of his closest friends says he smoked weed every day.
Yeah, he did.
Is that how he coped with all that was going on around him, or?
No, I think it's like some people have a glass of wine or two at night, and that was John's, outlet. That was John's relaxation.
A portrait more human, more personal, of the man who was in many ways America's son. Why does he still live in the American memory?
He was the symbol of hope after that horrific tragedy. This country sort of surrounded him and in some ways felt like they were taking care of him for the father he didn't have.
Something that really comes through in all these accounts of John is the sense that he's searching for his father, who he never got to know. Rosemary said she felt that John felt ripped off, that everyone else got to know his dad, but he never had the chance. JFK Jr. is a very revealing book. You're reading stories from John's closest friends, so you get to see his personality up close, the good and the bad. It's out today. Back to you.
All right, Ann Thompson, thank you. Well, with politics causing rifts between families and friends, we are taking stock of our mental health.
Up next, we're going to sit down with an expert to discuss how you can maintain a healthy headspace amid this heated election cycle.
Welcome back. In the wake of this weekend's political violence, we wanted to take a moment to check in with our mental well-being.
The National Institutes of Health says that the kind of violence we witnessed on Saturday can trigger mental health issues like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. So what can you do to better take care of yourself and move forward?
Well, psychotherapist Dr. Robbie Ludwig is here to help us with that. Dr. Ludwig, thank you for joining us for an important conversation this morning. First, let's walk through the emotional impact that a historic event, I mean, like what we saw on Saturday, the assassination attempt against former President Trump, a current presidential candidate. What can that have? What can that do to our mental health? What are some emotions people might be feeling right now?
Well, I think it was definitely quite shocking to see, especially to see it unfold on television. It was shocking. It was scary. It's like the whole world entered this new dark chapter in American history. And so not only did it leave people feeling concerned about their own well-being and depression, anxiety, and maybe fears of what they can expect when they walk out into the world, but real concerns about America's future. How can we disagree and not attack one another?
What can people do to check in with themselves to determine what they're feeling so that they can start to process it? And at what point should you consider getting outside help?
Yeah, such a good question. So people should try to identify if they're feeling irritable, easily angered, if they're having difficulty with sleep-wake cycle, if they're feeling depressed and anxious. Sometimes these signs show up somatically, where people have digestion issues, headaches, and again, difficulty falling asleep. So if these symptoms last for a period of 2 weeks or more, it's generally a good idea to get professional help, or at least an evaluation to make sure that you're getting the help and attention that you need.
With social media, right, information is so accessible. Video, images, so accessible for anyone with a phone or computer. That, of course, includes kids and teenagers at this point. How can parents explain what's happening right now to their kids?
Well, it's really important for parents to ask their children, what have they heard? What have they seen? Because it's very likely kids have seen something and may feel uncomfortable talking about it with their parents. So first, regulate your own emotions, address your child and say, what have you seen? If they've seen something, make sure that you listen and you try to validate their feeling. And if they're frightened about what's going on, you can ask them, how can they be part of the solution? There are always people helping out in a tragic scenario. So look for the helpers. Know that after an incident like this, there tends to be a revision of the way we address the world and address these problems. And to be part of the action, do you want to write letters to the doctors? Do you want to be part of a movement that helps reduce violence? As soon as we can take action and find our community, it's very soothing and helps us to feel better psychologically.
Mr. Rogers' advice, look for the helpers, always comes in handy. What are some of the good daily habits for people to practice that can help them take care of their mental health, especially during emotionally charged times like this?
So it's really important to pause and take a moment to ask yourself, how am I feeling? How am I doing? Am I feeling stressed? Am I feeling tension? Am I exercising? Am I meditating? Am I doing breathing exercises to make sure that I am managing myself and my emotional well-being? It's also really important to talk to others, talk to friends, talk to like-minded people so that you feel a sense of connection and not so isolated. And if you really feel that you need more help on top of that, find your group, go to your doctor. There really is help out there, but finding a community and taking time to ask yourself questions is really important.
And Dr. Ludwig, what about taking a break, right? I mean, obviously it's difficult for people like us to take a break from the news or from screens, but to get off of social media for a little while, to kind of maybe remove yourself from an echo chamber of content that you might sort of be stuck in. Can that help?
It can help so much. Like, take that break, and also to intellectually know what social media does. Social media can be very divisive. It can encourage us to feel very intense emotions. It exposes us just to one side of a situation. So once you're intellectually aware, it can help you from getting sucked in where your emotions are strong, but you don't know why that is. And there's a new study that found maybe we use our negative emotions. Maybe we don't try to get rid of them, but we use them to become involved in the political process or in groups that we feel will help the community. We need to look at our world through a third eye, which is our community has value, and we need to respect the democratic process and do whatever we need to do in order to make that happen.
Dr. Robbie Ludwig, a really important conversation during a tough week. Thank you for joining us.
Staying on the topic of politics, the Republican National Convention in full swing in Milwaukee, and the economy is one of the top items on the agenda. In fact, Monday night's theme was Make America Wealthy Again. It's an issue that's critically important to voters, topping a recent Quinnipiac University poll.
Yesterday, Republicans laid out some of the basics for their economic policy if Mr. Trump were to be elected to a second term. They also took the opportunity to take credit for some of the more successful parts of the economy during Trump's first term in office.
Here with more on the Republican economic agenda is NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans. Christine, good to have you with us. So last night we heard Republicans lay out their economic agenda for another Trump term. What stood out to you?
Good morning, you guys. Right, what a night. You heard a Republican Party that is not your grandparents' Republican Party, really trying to appeal to working class voters and trying to talk about kitchen table issues like gas prices and grocery prices and just how difficult it is, they say, under the Biden administration to make ends meet. So fascinating, trying to rewind and say that, under President Trump, it was the best economy in history. Of course, the economy was strong under President Trump, but wasn't the best in history. But what the record is for President Trump: deregulation, a lot of deregulation, tariffs, corporate tax cuts, and then, of course, his record is distorted by that big COVID hit on jobs and GDP, and now the economy has roared back since then.
Let's talk immigration, Christine, just because it's something that we've heard a lot about from the former president in terms of what he'd want to do. With what we know so far about his policy, how would it impact the economy?
You know, it's so interesting because he has promised that there will be mass deportations and has bragged on the campaign trail about how he will remove thousands and thousands, maybe millions of people from the U.S. He's also promised more tariffs, more tax cuts, and less green, really undoing some of the climate initiatives under Joe Biden and really drilling down and drill more oil. But on the immigration front, this is something that concerns economists because the spending plans of President Trump, his proposed spending plans and his immigration plans, many think would be dangerous to the economy and actually reignite inflation. So some of the things that are very popular on the campaign trail are pretty unpopular if you're talking to economists.
Let's talk more about inflation.
Sure.
Trump has taken credit for low inflation pre-COVID during his administration. Blames the Biden administration for the high price that consumers have seen over the last 2 years. But we did get some good economic news just last week when it comes to inflation. So where do things stand?
So inflation is this, has just been issue number one for so many American voters, and you're going to hear a lot about it. You heard about it last night. You hear about it all week. This is what inflation looked like under the Trump administration. You know, pretty much below 2%, kind of consistent with what we saw in the Obama administration, quite frankly. And this is that COVID reopening where you saw inflation go up to 9%. But there's been a lot of progress that's been made. And honestly, the Fed may be in this position that pretty soon it'll be able to start lowering interest rates because so much of the inflation inflation fight has been successful, and eventually maybe next year you'll get back down to that 2% line that so many think is ideal inflation in the U.S.
Christine, we often hear politicians ask, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Last night, we heard from many Americans who say they are not. But tell us quickly, why is that a hard question to answer?
It's hard because of that COVID distortion, right? I mean, 4 years ago right now, we were in lockdown in much of the country, and we were worried, and people were dying. So it's hard to kind of make that comparison. But I will make a comparison here on something that has been President Trump used to take credit for, the stock market. He used to use the stock market kind of as his letter grade on the economy and how people feel. Stock market hit records in the Trump administration. The stock market is still hitting records, has continued that trajectory. Conditions for business and the economy are quite favorable right now. It is the inflation story that has been a problem for so many American families. And while it's getting under control, it isn't fixed quite yet. I think you will hear this campaign really drilling down on inflation over and over again this week.
All right, Christine Romans, thank you so much.
Welcome.
Important stuff. Thanks. Let's stay on the economy. We've got some great news actually for your wallet because interest rates could potentially be on the horizon.
Yeah,
interest rate cuts.
Yep, CNBC Savannah now has that and other money news. Good morning, Savannah.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Savannah. Yeah, so, well, let's start with this because the markets are sitting near or at all-time highs, as in the case of the Dow. And stocks getting a boost yesterday from Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. Speaking at an event in Washington, Powell signaling the Fed won't wait until inflation gets down to their 2% target before they start cutting interest rates. Now, those sort of dovish comments leading investors to change their expectations again. They're now fully pricing in the Fed's first rate cut in September and up to 3 cuts this year. All right, you can now take Apple's newest operating software for a test drive. The company releasing the beta version of iOS 18 for the iPhone, iPad, Mac, and Apple Watch. It includes key updates, including custom options to allow users to put apps wherever they want on the home screen and a new layout for the Photos app. What it won't have for now is the Apple Intelligence AI features, which won't be rolled out until this fall. And Prime Day is here, and while shoppers continue to seek bargains, Amazon is facing a lot more competition this year. Walmart and Target have already held their own discount days in an effort to lure shoppers. TikTok launched its first ever Deals for You Days event, which started July 9th and runs through tomorrow. Temu is also holding its Temu Week sale through Thursday with markdowns up to 90%. Adobe expects shoppers to spend a record $14 billion online at retailers during Prime Day, up 10% from last year, guys.
Wow, that is just such a wild number. Savannah, thank you so much.
Coming up for the first time, the Olympic Games will include break dancing this year.
So what will it take to bring home the gold? Well, a Team USA breaker is going to take us through the historic event. We're back, and so is a stellar show that's literally out of this world. The annual Perseid Meteor Shower is underway. It started on Sunday and is expected to last through late August with peak visibility, write this down, on the evening of August 12th and the morning of August 13th. Now, the Perseid Meteor Shower happens when the Earth passes through a cloud of dust and debris left over from a comet. And the dazzling shooting stars we see during the event are pieces of debris burning up as they pass through Earth's atmosphere. The shower is particularly sparkly because it produces such bright meteors at such a fast rate. Spectators could end up seeing up to 100 meteors per hour at the shower's peak. We gotta check it out.
Sparkly. It's like sky glitter.
I know. Woo.
Right. Thanks, Savannah. We're now just 10 days away from the Summer Olympics, and this morning we're highlighting the newest Olympic sport debuting in Paris. It's called breaking, and yes, it's as hard as it sounds. USA team member Victor Montalvo shows us how hard it is to put a routine together.
Breaking, you always got to switch it up. You always got to reinvent your style, reinvent your moves. Everything has to look different each time. I just did one of my signatures, Super Montalvo. There's a power move that's called the UFO. So from that move, I was like, okay, what can I do to kind of make it my own or something that someone hasn't done yet? Like, all right, just spin on one hand. So one hand UFO. And then from there, I just did 101 flares to babies. I don't know why we call them babies. Held onto my leg. And then from there, I threaded out, freeze. After that, I went up, did some top rock, and I went to Assisi. That's this footwork move. Then from Assisi, I went to one of my signatures. I don't have a name for it yet, but basically that's one of my like super original signatures that I always do. I grab my left arm, grabs the opposite leg, and then my right arm grabs the opposite leg.
Whoa! I would break every bone in my body.
That's what the breaking.
That's what the breaking would mean. Broken bones.
It's really cool to imagine it as an Olympic sport. Just, you know, like how there's obviously metrics there for judging on it, but it'll be really cool to see.
Can't wait. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Stay with us, though. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.